All right, y'all. Powerful film. I got to be completely honest. That was the best documentary I've ever seen in my life. That was, I mean, that blew me away. I had high expectations for the film, but geez, that was incredible. I mean, how do y'all feel? Before we kind of get into the topic, just what are your impressions of the film?
I will add a quick note that just some perspective to it. I don't know. I wasn't completely sure if they covered it in the documentary, but he was in self-exile because of the Arab war, and when he came back to, so he's originally from Palestine, but he used to live in Beirut, which is the capital of Lebanon. And in Israel, they speak 3 languages primarily, French, Arabic, and Hebrew. So the language that the other older lady was speaking towards the end of the video, that was Hebrew. She's Jewish, I believe. But the first lady who used to live in Washington, she was speaking Arabic. And of course, Mahmoud Darwish, he was speaking Arabic. He is one of the most influential philosophers / poets of the Arab world. So it was really interesting to get that kind of like a deeper inside look to his life.
Yeah. So I mean, were you moved by the film, or what did you think of it? What are your impressions?
I mean, it was really moving because, see, when we used to study him in our history books, he was portrayed to be this, how do I put it? This great guy, that everyone loves, everyone gets along with. But in the movie, in the documentary, when we got a deeper look into how he was, when we took a look at those love letters that he had exchanged with the other lady, it shows that he wasn't always that guy like how he is portrayed to be in at least our history books in Arabic, the ones that I've studied. He at points he was violent, as the first lady was talking about, the one who was from Washington. I forgot her name. And at points he was super emotional, where he would break into tears and start crying and all that jazz out of nowhere. So it was fun. It was very insightful, and it was really touching.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not surprised. You kind of like see how his life was. That he was so like emotional. I do see what you're trying to say, Yusha. I mean, for me, it's almost unbelievable that a lady wait for him for like 2 weeks, for him to just kind of like watch her once and then like, yeah, bye bye. It's kind of like, I mean, I'm assuming he has his reasons, but for someone who is a poet, I would assume that he would value something like that a little bit more. Maybe he was just trying to experience something so he can maybe write a little bit about it. But it is a very deep movie. I'm glad that I got to see this side of the. Well, I'm not too knowledgeable about the war that happened there and some of the things that comes with it. So it's really trying to like process the information. But yeah.
I think I need to rewatch the documentary.
Coming back to his identity and who he was. Oh, go ahead, Natalia. I was just going to bring back to this topic. Go ahead.
He's that rude. Don't worry.
I think I need to rewatch after reading a little bit more about the historical context, so I can understand it a little bit better. But I like the point that you made about the his life and how he's portrayed in a certain way in history books, but having that inside that window into his life is a little different. I like the whole language connection, and I wrote that quote that about the translation when he was nervous because the poems were translated and he didn't know how much was lost in the translation. I have a degree in translation studies, so that is very interesting. So now I'm gonna go back and read more about his work and how it was translated, and you know, how it really feels in English, because I guess that's the language, or maybe it's in Spanish too. I don't know. I like also the feelings. I wonder if artists sometimes, because they are so sensitive to feelings and things that happen and how they impact their lives, maybe they also like that connection to the darker side within the self. So I wonder if the violence came to that. I wonder if he was conflicted about meeting the lady in Paris or not. But I would have been really upset. I would have been like, bye. Okay, and the last thing I'm gonna mention, I made some connections to Gabriela Mistral's life. If you all want to go and look at her work. So Gabriela Mistral was from Chile. I opened here to see when she was born. She was born before Darwish, but she also had to exile herself. She lived in Mexico. She also lived here in the United States. And she's portrayed like, that's why I like your point so much. She's portrayed as this very dedicated teacher, because she was a teacher at 15 years old. I remember in this documentary, he was already saying poems when he was 17. So that was the first connection I made. And she's like this very dedicated lady. She won the Nobel Prize. But there is a darker side to her life, which I recently learned. So it's interesting to see two poets that have these kind of similar aspects to their life. And her love life was also hard. She was in love with someone and he committed suicide. And later in life, there are many rumors that she fell in love with her secretary. And she's from here, from the United States, and there is a whole book about the relationship. So it was also like a very tormented love life also. So interesting connections as I was watching this documentary with another poet from Latin America. Okay, the end.
Can I say something real quick, guys? Because I'm about to leave real soon here. I kind of agree with what Natalia was saying. You know, like we kind of get to see, I guess, the real version of the people that are like kind of, I guess, they're seen as sort of this mystical figure that we don't really know the real side to them. You know, he said in the beginning, he says, "How can I represent my country when I can't even represent myself?" I think that's a good insight as to like how he felt as a person, that people were looking at him like in this way that essentially maybe he didn't feel, you know. And I feel like it's interesting his background coming from an area where essentially he's automatically not accepted, he's automatically seen as a stranger, and he feels as a stranger. And I feel like for a lot of poets that I've read upon, and my own personal experiences, I feel like that's something that you can kind of garner deep feelings and deep emotions for writing, is just this feeling of estrangement, of being this person in the world that you're different. And essentially you look to yourself and then you look to the outside of yourself and then you find things that maybe others can't see as clearly. And so I thought that was very interesting and very deep and poetic. I agree with Natalia as well, that I feel like I have to know a little bit more history to be as in depth, like as to understand the documentary, because I did feel like something was missing. But in terms of everything, just the language and the way he was putting his poems together in terms of like his life, it was just so beautiful, and it was great. So I really enjoyed it.
I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, great points. I mean, shall we segue to the identity question? I mean, you see, identity came up a lot, and something I wanted to kind of focus on was this idea of weaponizing poetics, which is to say, you take something like poetry, it becomes sort of a political vehicle, a political mechanism. Poetry, as Orlando was saying, is typically something that's very personal. You know, a poetic soul. I mean, we use that expression to describe unique individuals. This was a poetic approach to politics at a time where, again, there was very clear political turmoil. surrounding specifically questions of identity, of a nationwide identity, embodied by him personally, and really in very unique and compelling ways. So yeah, I feel as though the entire documentary really was this question of, well, what is my identity? What is the identity that I'm trying to, I suppose, challenge in certain areas or embrace in other times in the documentary? His personal identity became something political, and yet it was very interesting to hear him say, I want to live a private life. It's like he was at odds with his own self. He felt like he needed to sort of galvanize people with his poetry, but when you do something like that, you become a part of the political scheme. It becomes very difficult to be private. So that was like a personal choice I feel he had to make. I think we all have to make choices like that. I mean, obviously not on that grand of a scale, but it's that kind of thing where I suppose his values were the center between his personal understanding, his personal identity, his understanding of himself, and all the political elements that were transpiring during his entire life. I mean, every question, every interview seems to be people asking him, who are you? What do you identify as? What do you want to identify as? And they meant politically. Really fascinating.
It's interesting you bring that up, Professor Manzi, because I don't know if it was mentioned on the documentary, but Darwish was the confidant to Yasser Arafat, who was the first president of the Palestinian National Authorities. And this relates back to how he was so much conflicted with, Darwish was so much conflicted with himself that at one place to his loved ones, he was saying that I want to lead a personal life. But on the other hand, here's the same guy becoming the confidant to the first president of the Palestinian National Authority. So where in this realm, I guess the question of his, not only of his, but as in the ideology of personality becomes so expansive that you can have as little amount of personalities as one, and you can have them all the way to however many relations you might have, because as we mentioned in the previous two weekly meetings that we have, that you're not always the same person in every situation, because that's just not how humans are programmed to be. You're programmed to adapt, you're programmed to read the energy in the room, and then you're reacting to that. So you're not always like me, myself, I consider to be a very hot-tempered kind of guy. Like I'm very. It's easy to agitate me, but if I'm in an environment where I understand that me being that aggressive would harm me eventually, I would still control myself more than I would in a less hostile environment.
Yeah. You know, it's funny because this guy was putting himself in hostile environments intentionally. I mean, do we call that responsible? Do we call that courageous? It's tough. Yeah, I'm sorry, Orlando. Do you want to say something?
Oh no, I don't know if am I making noise?
Yeah, your thing is turning blue.
Oh, sorry. No. I could say something though. I mean, in terms of like him putting himself in that hostile environment, I mean, I think it just speaks to his feeling of like, I don't know, just chasing this concept of I guess like, nah, I can't put it into words right now. I don't know why. Like it's kind of a sensation seeking almost. I feel like it's like you're kind of challenging these ideas that are there, and you're kind of looking for a reason to write. I feel like that's the best way I can put it. I don't know. That's what kind of comes to mind.
Yeah, I mean, maybe he was really chasing those big emotions so he can actually write something that he felt it was. I mean, maybe that was his motivation, like the source of his creativity, to be like in that raw sensation that make it more meaningful for him to write, because otherwise it wouldn't really mean anything. I mean, for me, it was very interesting to. It was one of the things he was saying, that I think it was like a poem that he wrote to her mom. That he said like he never thought he was gonna be sing. Like he just made it was very private, and all of a sudden it was kind of like something to be sing. So if you have that since a youth, like you kind of get used to like maybe to have certain type of exposure. So you are gonna try to go to have that exposure, because a regular poem maybe doesn't make it for him. Which it seemed like he was very like, he has his emotions really like as a focus of his life.
But I have a question for all of you. Like, do you think that he was writing for himself, or he was writing for others? Because, well, no, tell me what you think. And then I tell you the reasoning behind the question.
Okay.
Hands down, I will say without the smallest amount of doubt in my mind, I'm pretty sure he was writing. He was writing for others and to interact with others, because Arabic is a very vast language, and translating it takes away from a lot of the meaning. And I know that firsthand, because the poems that they had translated for this documentary, they were not. I mean, they were, but they were not the same as he had written and meant in Arabic, because we studied them in high school history, not here, of course, back in Saudi Arabia. So we do get a lot of hints that he was writing for others, and why they got published and he got so famous, because when others read them, they felt that individualistic connection with him, which made people want to read more of his publication.
Yeah, I see that. I feel like it was a little bit for both though, because I mean I feel like when you're facing these sort of inner conflicts, or these conflicts around the world, most of the time, you look to yourself to kind of see what you think about it, and then really you start to feel that externally. I think the best way to empathize, or to look at it from others' perspectives, is when you first understand it for yourself. And then once you understand your own emotions and your own feelings, you start to look at it from the other people's point of views and other people's eyes, and you start to really feel almost this collective consciousness. And seeing as not even it's not even just himself going through this, but all of his people going through this, essentially that could have been something that spurred those feelings of emotion and feeling like I need to do something in the way that I can. And essentially that's what I feel like. It wasn't necessarily just for himself, but for others, for himself being that he has these feelings that just needs to express, and then for others because he understands there's an injustice that he wants to speak out about.
Yeah, I actually believe also that it's kind of like both. I don't think he was just writing for others, because I mean there has to be something for him one way or another. So maybe that, like you should mention, maybe that was his way of interacting with others, but it was still somehow for himself. It was like a way for him to be able to express, maybe more comfortable, since at least whenever you write something, that words stay, but he was never in one place. So it was a way for him to actually have something of his word. So I guess he was maybe seeing it as a legacy.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with all three of y'all. I think but here's the thing, is that he seemed to be pretty insistent that he wasn't writing for himself. That he was, at least that's what he's saying. He's saying, I mean, he's seeing these injustices, and they are causing him to be poetic in a way where he kind of understands his influence. I mean, I think that one of the most powerful scenes in the film was in the school with the children, and the professor was teaching them about what a poet is, what a poet's intended to be. And they said, poet's supposed to be humane. A poet's supposed to appeal to peace and kind of togetherness. And yet he was accused of inciting violence because of his poetry, as though that were his intention. And I think that's kind of ambiguous. If he feels that there's injustice, you know, maybe he thought his poetry would somehow correct it, but how do you typically correct injustice of this kind of political magnitude, especially when violence is just so I was horrified by some of those violent images, by the way, like really, truly disturbing. You know, I mean, not just unfortunate, you know, circumstances. You really get to see them crystallized in the pain on the face of these people, especially the man who had his arm broken. Okay, so without, okay, I don't want to go down that road quite yet, but getting back to my point here, it seems like a poet is seeking to figure out who he or she or they are, like a self. The themes of his poems seem to be displacement. He's been displaced. He's been exiled. He doesn't know what his identity is. And that's what's kind of driving his poetry. And then he began to realize perhaps that, well, there's a reason why I'm struggling with an identity. And it has to do with the political, we'll just say, circumstances. And so I do think on some level, perhaps he is trying to reconcile the political nature of things through his poetry in a way that also allows him to get some sort of sense of self, some sort of identity that is stable. I mean, look, I love it when the guy said, the interviewer said, do you want to become a citizen of Israel again? And he was like, that's a sensitive question. I don't think just politically, I think also personally. I think it's very difficult to pull the two apart if your poetry is about politics and politics is about your identity. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not even sure that maybe he knows exactly why he's writing. I would like to talk about poetry again as being weaponized, as poetry as being like a political mechanism, either for peace or for, you know, synthesis. And stay out.
I think he had to go to work.
Yeah, Orlando is off. Yeah.
I mean, when you hear
it's been hard not to hear you. You must. I can't really hear you much. Can you speak again, Nancy?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, have you ever considered poetry in the context of, again, playing a central role in political upheavals, like weaponizing poetry? Poetry is typically something that's very personal.
Well, yeah, I mean, it is linked to my country's history, so I can see it. But if you ask me, like, without having that background, I will probably say no. But since I've seen it, I know that it can be weaponized. I'm still kind of mesmerized how words have such effect. Like at the end of the document, I was just like impressed. Like, you have a person who is literally just reading something, and so many people are willing to be there and stand an ovation for a writing. Something like you can read it on your own, but you still go there. Like, what is it that the message sends you that you are willing to like go to that land and people like falling in love? It really speaks a lot of like of how we perceive ourselves. I don't know exactly. I'm still trying to process that. I think that I'm probably gonna have to like rewatch it as Natalia mentioned it. Because I mean, at first I feel like I need to read the biography of Mahmoud because I didn't know it that well, and I feel like some meaningful aspects I couldn't get him completely because I don't know his background completely. But how does somebody writing a poem that it was probably personal becomes into all this movement to the point that he becomes confident and everything just by writing poems? So pretty much like I mean, pretty much you can then have so much impact on anything pretty much if you're really like if you have a vocation for it, you know. I'm just mesmerized, but I can see it because, for example, in the politic world, if you have somebody who is spreading maybe a message of hope or maybe a message that kind of like have people see perspective that they don't want you to consider, then yeah, it becomes a tool that you need to eradicate. Otherwise, you're gonna go against your own political agenda and your own view of how the country should be run.
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent point. And that's why it gets so frustrating when he doesn't have control over instant translations.
I will add to that, and that was beautifully put, Ferdinando. It's really frustrating to watch that people cannot understand the true essence of it, not only because of the translation, but how you utter it. For example, I can be reading a poetry and I can just read it in a single breath versus properly delivering it. And I've heard, or at least in our language, Arabic, we have a saying about when something is exquisitely beautiful. We say it's as beautiful as poetry. So that only adds to the fact that poetry can be or is such a pure power that it's like a double-edged sword. You can wield it, sure, but to properly deliver it to properly mold it to how you're wanting to use it in terms of delivering the message that you're wanting to, it's really really interesting and frustrating at the same point, because even to this day, what's going on in Israel, in Palestine, in Syria, in Lebanon, it's, I mean, his poetry does not seem all that out of date if you ever get a chance to go and visit those countries. I mean, landmass wise, they're the most beautiful countries I've ever seen, but humanity wise, at the same talking, they hold the most evil creatures within themselves. uh it's I'm out of words of how to describe it, that something so beautiful can cause something so violent, where in certain places, not all not the entire country, but in certain places, you cannot walk down the street without crying, because so much bad is going on. And I don't want to put anyone in a bad mood, but just to portray of how bad it is, you see dead bodies on the ground and there's no one to bury them. It's really heart-wrenching. So this is why I believe that his sense of identity, or the fact that he was still reluctant to relate himself to any country, be a citizen of Israel, would you accept it? That, I mean, that is a very sensitive question even to this day. It's a very controversial question, if because the land itself is so disputed and so many bad things have taken place there. Yes, it is a home, it is a place, but not a lot of people want to associate themselves with it because of all the atrocities that have taken place there. One, and two, because for him specifically, when him and his family left Israel for 2 years, they went to Beirut, and when they came back, everything was destroyed. Their family home, their land, their farms, everything was like gone and destroyed. So I think that was like a very bleeding nerve for him, that the reporter had put his finger on. And that's why he was so quick to answer that it's a very sensitive topic. Like, I don't want to talk about it. Don't bring it up to me.
Yeah, no, that's a great point too.
Yeah, I mean, there are 2 points that I do want to follow from after Yusha. One is like by him by he saying yes or no to that question, like whether like he want to like that's a sensitive question. He also would change the meaning of his poem in a sense, because some people are gonna start like saying it as a, this is the point of a Palestinian, and I also believe, and I'm trying to not forget something that I wanted to say before. Oh man, the idea is escaping me.
We'll help you get it back. We'll help you get it back.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I had a couple things I wanted to say. I want to ask Orlando too, because I know Orlando has written poems and he's presented them publicly. Have y'all ever tried to write a poem?
I have written many poems myself, yes.
Oh, okay. So I mean, I ask because I think that helps one understand the film here. I mean, what it is, the activity that has caused his entire life to be what it is. I think if you try to do that, you gain a real appreciation for how delicate a process it is. And then you juxtapose that with something like violence and war. It's a really interesting pairing there. The other thing, and getting back to Yusha's point, is that, I mean, most people, when they ask themselves, who am I? They first think, where am I from? Where do I come from? They think of their, their home, like their first home. And when that very place gets called into question, or when you get rejected from that very place, I mean, it's got to be existentially devastating. And so I wonder if that doesn't, on a personal level, fuel the drive to be poetic. And then maybe on one level, again, turn the lens towards oh, that is an adorable dog. Turn the lens towards the very reason why you feel personally isolated from yourself, like your identity has been just disconnected, and then poetry helps them suture it back together in a way that maybe only poetry can.
Yeah, I'm still trying to remember what I wanted to say. I know it was important. Oh my God. It was important, I can remember. Man, okay, I'm gonna focus on something else and then come back. It's all right. That's how it usually works.
I've been there a million times. Yeah, so I mean, oh, Natalia, have you ever tried to write poetry?
In my teen years, probably not very good poetry, but I have a few ideas. Kind of okay. I'm gonna try to condense. I'm following a YouTuber who is a painter, and he said that when he's going to paint, it's kind of like shaping a feeling. Like he takes a feeling and he will say this was a life that he did. So he will say, like, if you take a feeling and you think, what color would I color this feeling? How this feeling would look like? And he gathers that for inspiration. So I wonder if different artists, including Mahmoud, have a version of this. So in my vision, connecting one thing to the other, maybe he was taking all this that was within him to shape the poetry. So that's why I was asking earlier if you thought that he was writing for himself or for others. But the reverse side of the poetry in this case is how you do not voice. Like maybe there is a true desire to have that personal, private life, but how can you not voice all that injustice and all these turbulence that is also happening? And if you see that others are connecting to it, how come or how can you not share? So maybe he was conflicted, not only in his identity, but how to, or what is the contribution or the final objective or his art or his creation. It also mirrors that duality of being from one place but being in another at the same time. So a lot of duality in his life from my perspective. Yeah, so I like the idea of, so close one idea. Go back to your question about poetry. Only when I was in my teens, but my mother is also a painter, just not professional, but very, very serious hobby. So I think that's the art that I connect to the most. So probably, yeah, that one, painting.
Okay, yeah.
That's interesting. I mean, I guess we can go in some direction here to see like your preference of art. What does it say from your identity? Because I do like
some
paintings.
of my that one
Yes,
I made that painting in
I
there, the blue
understand,
one.
but I understand. Well, for example, I love paintings, but I've never been actually exposed to them. So, I, if you if you put me to draw, I would do it. But it was gonna take me a time. But it has to be very methodical and very, it's gonna be weird. It doesn't come that natural. But when it comes to words, I just bound to it like instinctively. So I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Like, what does your expression of art is also linked with your personality and your identity.
Agree. Yeah.
For this person, like he didn't have that. He could have chosen painting, and those paintings could have been something that he could be like also have the same effect. People would maybe like chasing him because of his art, and people trying to destroy his art and things like that. But he didn't choose painting; he chose to speak. So why he did that? Why he chose to speak other than to paint, or maybe like create a song, even though a song is also a form of speaking, but why not a song and instead of a poem when a poem can be written? Like it can be written, and the song can just be like, actually, I mean, it has a bigger impact if you sing it out loud, I guess. It's like I don't know, there's differences. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I think it's the political. I think you could charge people up with words better than a poem, better than a painting. I think maybe he thought,
Yeah.
Because again, going back to Yusha's point about the delivery, it's like, here's my painting, look at it, versus I'm going to deliver you my painting verbally, and I'm going to control the tone, I'm going to control the syncopation, and I'm going to do so in a way that's very rhetorically persuasive, I suppose, to appeal to one's emotions. I mean, yeah, images appeal to your emotions immediately, but it does seem like words do the same thing, but in a way that's different, but perhaps more inclined to provoke action, as opposed to maybe paintings. Just speculating here. And Natalia, I can't see the painting you're pointing to, but I don't see it. Oh, you're on mute.
I think that should be my motto for the quarantine. I'm on mute. Let me see if I can reach it. I have a few others on top that I made. Like I made that one. No, not the one with the woman, but the other one. Let's see if I can reach the one that is lower. But also, I really like both of your points on language, because it makes me think of what Joshua said earlier about the connection they have with language, and they're saying that they say when something is beautiful, they compare it to poetry. So I wonder if maybe the people connected so strongly because it was poetry as opposed as another way of art. Okay, let me go and
I
reach for this.
remember, I
Thank you.
remember. Thank you for bringing that up, Natalia. You're the best. You're the best. Not only has the best shirt, but you bring the right topic. Aha. So that's the other thing that I wanted to say. Like for me, it is also very important that a poetry, I mean, every reader will have a different perception of the poetry, regardless of, because we all have our own experiences. So like, how is it like? Okay, let me remember exactly what I wanted to bring up, because like he was writing something that is not necessarily linked. No, I mean, of course some of them were to political issues between these countries, but people were reading it, and it was them the one who was giving them the actual meaning to be political. It wasn't him himself. So how much of a fault is from the poet to make it political if the people who are receiving it are the ones who are making the connection for it to be actually political? So was him really like a slave of those who were able to read it? I mean, he was concerned, for example, of how it was translated to other languages, but maybe also there was some issue being translated in their own language, because everybody's like giving it this definition of something that it could be at the end of the day will make him go away and exile. So I guess also that can kind of like play along with how he feel whenever he tried to engage with someone, because in some extent it is people who is making him move away side to side, even though he's writing, because he is writing so he can be expressed, but it's how other people receive the message that is kind of like making him go away, unable to actually connect with them because no one really is understanding him.
That is a brilliant point. Yeah, I'm so glad you remembered that.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Okay,
I think that is. I'm sorry.
It's okay. I'm showing this.
You painted that? Holy cow!
That's
Yeah,
impressive.
Yeah, you're really.
I'm trying to do it again because I haven't painted anything in a long time. So anyway, so go ahead.
That was really beautiful, Natalia. It's really pretty. It's far better than I can ever do. But what I was gonna come back to is the fact that he was, if you not only reading it, but if you look at the tone or the voice of his poems, you can see that to a certain point, to a certain degree, there's a lot of unease to it. There's a lot of his choosing of specific words is very representative of like pain and a lot of regret. So I think that also comes in from his, that also reflects his identity, because we at the end of everything we still have to keep in mind that he was displaced and he was very young when he's witnessing all these. And by the time he grows up, he says he comes back to his home and he finds the same stuff that was going on when he was displaced initially. So for him, that period of bad ending and good beginning, he never saw that, or he was unable to properly see it. That, oh, people were still dying when I had left. Now a couple years later that I come back, people are still dying. What can I do about it? So he started pushing out these poems that communicate with people that, hey, this is not how it's supposed to be. The government is supposed to be protecting us. They're supposed to be saving our lives. We should not be scouring around by ourselves. It is their responsibility. We elected them to do it. And that's where a lot of the pain comes in, that he as a person, the most he can do in his capacity is to encourage people to take action for it. Because in Islam, there's three things you can do if you want to change something. First thing is at the top tier, where you physically go and change, for example, someone being robbed, right? The first tier would be me going physically and stopping the robbery. If I'm unable to stop it physically, then I would have, the second tier is me voicing my opinion about it. And the third tier at the very bottom is me thinking of it as bad in my own heart. So, and this, in this specific position or dilemma that he was put in, because he could not do anything physically to stop the killings, to stop the wars, to stop the Arab-Israel war that was taking place when he was growing up, he said that, okay, I cannot do anything physically, but I can voice my opinion. This is something that I'm good at. I can reach out to people. That is what I'm going to do. So he started pushing out these poems, and consciously he started choosing words that were engaging to people's emotions. He, even in the documentary, if you look at it, there's a reason why they chose those sensitive or very gruesome images that Professor Manzi was referring to earlier, that they stick with you. You don't forget them. And when you pair that with his type of poetry, where it either makes you angrier or it makes you cry or weep, paired with those images, it gives you something that, oh, this is happening. I wasn't even aware of that. And it brings you to this whole new dimension of what's taking place on the other side of the world. Because from here, we see what we see only that's presented in the news. That, oh, okay, President Trump is good with Israel connections or relations or whatever. But when you go down to the grassroots of it, when you go down to what is people there physically and in person, that is when you get the sense of hey, what can I do to help? What can I do to make it easier? What can I do to make it better? And that is where he comes in as a very powerful entity that can basically rile up people. And that is exactly why he was tossed in prison for a very huge amount of his life, for getting people to that point where people took action against the government or the stuff that was happening in their country.
Yeah, I mean, y'all are just doing a great job of analyzing this. It's really awesome to hear. I mean, yeah, I think both of y'all are just getting at this idea here of, I mean, look, he was trying to make poetry accomplish something, and so as you were saying, Yusha, when it wasn't working, I mean, that's a weird way to say my poetry isn't working. And it's like, well, what does that mean? Well, it means it's not doing what I'm intending it to do. And I think, a part of that has to do with what Fernando was saying, how people are receiving it and maybe misinterpreting it or kind of recharacterizing it and then promoting that. And so I do think at a certain point, his art became a tool with a very conscious goal in mind. And in that regard, maybe some of the charges against him of being a political enemy aren't entirely off base. But the motivations behind him doing this, I think you guys are, everybody's nailing it. I think they started with a personal experience that he found so jarring, and then it just amplified when he realized this is not an uncommon experience. And I think you're right too, Yusha, this idea that he understood what his strengths were and how he could impact things positively in his own way, and so he really kind of tripled down on it. But at what cost? Well, I think it comes at the cost of him never being able to restore his personal identity. Whether or not he regrets it, I guess, is its own question. I mean, he's celebrated as the greatest poet in the history of Palestine. So I guess he does have a legacy there. I'm not so sure that's what he was going for, but he certainly wasn't shying away from that description while he was alive. Seems like it helped him get married. So I mean, yeah, there's a lot of, yeah, what did you think about all that other stuff too? Just real quick. I mean, him breaking the dishes. That was a little, I mean, poets can be passionate, but that was something.
I think that was him dealing with his internal conflict, as you said, that his poetry was not working in the sense that it wasn't doing what he wanted it to do. It wasn't malleable to him. It wasn't obedient to him at that point. So we're treating it like a living, breathing creature, his poetry, or any poetry for that matter. And I think that was his way of letting out that built up anger that I'm doing so much and nothing is being changed. I'm saying all these words and people are not taking any action. That things are still that things are still the same as they were before. What am I doing wrong? So I think that was his kind of outlet of, I mean, sure, it came out completely the wrong way. No one should ever channel their aggression through violence, but that's just how it happened. It was an impulsive thing to do. He got the dishes, he threw them, and when his wife asked him, "Why did you do that?" he said, "Oh, that's just how I do dishes." So at this point, he was still trying to keep something hidden or kept away from his wife. Maybe he didn't want her to experience the things that he was experiencing.
Yeah, okay, that's a very generous way to interpret that.
Yeah, it's very generous, I would say, because for me, it's just him trying to keep that for himself. I mean, I think he wasn't able to completely, I mean, for a poet to not be able to understand what he's feeling and not put it into words, it would be very frustrating.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, some of his lines are just so beautiful. What was one? If you look at a rose and don't experience pain, tell your heart thank you. Jeez, moving. Your what is it? Your presence is my dying. Your absence is my death. Very evocative.
yeah, I mean, the girl was crying, like, still, like, years after that. Imagine. Yeah, I don't know. I do feel like he's, as you mentioned, Nancy, I do think that his poem were used to get some type of movement. I don't think he has like complete control of the effect. I mean, of course he didn't, but I think it's worse whenever you see that somebody else is given a direction that is not it was not the intended. And
to your point, because I think you nailed it earlier, Fernando. It's once you and kind of how Yusha was describing it as its own entity. Once you allow a poem to become public, it's its own thing, and people are free to interpret it however they want. That's why poetry can be so dangerous, especially if you're good at it. You could be really good at sending the wrong message, which is to say the message you didn't intend to send. But your words are so, I guess, persuasive, entrancing.
Yeah, relatable to each person.
Yeah, I mean, you got to be real careful. And so if he's trying to make poetry accomplish something particular, yeah, he's going to feel frustration for sure when it's not doing what he wants it to do. But I think all good poets know on some level the poem isn't theirs. The poem's others. It belongs to all of us, which makes it difficult.
I guess at that standing, that would make his poems fall to the criteria of not what was said, but how it was said. Because I remember growing up, whenever my siblings and I got into an argument, my dad would always say, like, of course, as kids, we would apologize and we wouldn't mean it like it was, oh, like, I'm sorry or whatever. And then my dad would say, it's not about what you say, it's about how you say it. So we do this a lot in criticism, right? When we're criticizing something, it's your tone makes the difference between a creative criticism and a destructive criticism. I'm sorry. So I think that is that is kind of the gray area where he might have had lost control, or he might have been under the illusion of losing control, because none of us are in his shoes. And I don't know if I'm supposed to say sadly or gladly, but but it is what it is. And until the day of his death, he kind of lived with that regret of not having to have done enough for his country, for his people. So I think that was one of his most difficult times of his life.
Yeah, maybe poetry can only accomplish so much, and he had to sort of realize that.
But in this sense, see, we're referring to poetry, right? But in this sense, does music, does speeches, does sketches or arts not fall under the same category? Because I don't know if you guys have listened to the song. It's an older song by Cranberries. The title is Zombies. I think that lady who sang it, she's dead. But if you look at if you truly listen to the lyrics of it, you understand what it's trying to say. It's not just a song about a war or people having bombs in their hearts or whatever that's supposed to mean. It's about the struggle that we go through every day, the internal battles that we face, and how we react to others based on those internal battles.
I think you're right. I think that's what maybe all of art is. That so no matter what kind of art you produce, poems, paintings, once somebody else witnesses it or hears it, internalizes it, it becomes theirs. And that might be tough for somebody who's an artist who's really trying to express his or her or their own personal perspectives. And then when somebody says, no, I got something different out of it, yeah, that might be tormenting them.
Yeah, that was another thing Orlando and I were discussing yesterday. I think after we had concluded the meeting, Professor, after you had left, I think the three of us came to the same conclusion between Orlando, myself, and Ferdinando, that the figure 8 is a better example than comparing 6 and 9, because with 6 and 9 you only see 2 sides, but with figure 8 you see 4 sides, of which 2 people see the same and the other see the same. So if you're looking at it lengthwise, you see an 8 regardless if you're standing on top or the bottom. But if you look at it from either sides, it looks like an infinity sign. So depending on your own perspective, depending on where you are physically, where you are mentally, because it does come back to the point of how many people agree with what, because that is how we govern ourselves. Say elections. Why do we hold elections? Because most people vote for a certain person, he wins the elections, and boom, you have a new president. So at this point, we have to ask ourselves, is majority authority or is right might?
What is the last thing that I couldn't hear the last word? Right might?
See, for our for one of my classes, our professor said might is right versus right is might. Like she meant to say, or she was actually referring to what a lot of people say goes versus what is right is what people say or people believe in.
Okay. I think I get it. I think. All right.
Yeah, like those kids said at school, everybody deserves their rights, no matter what country you're from. And they, I guess the implication was that the poetry was resonating with these children, and these children, they're not politically mindful. They're not really, they don't know the intricacies of like the war that's taking place. Although they're experiencing the fallout, and yet it seems like on some level even they agree with the essence of a lot of this guy's poems, which is that look, every human has a certain intrinsic dignity that needs to be recognized politically, legally, rights, not simply through metaphor. Although it was so telling when he said we settled on the same metaphor. Poetry is supposed to be unique and individual, but they're finding this common ground. Yeah, I don't know. I just really dug this movie. I don't know who exactly suggested it, but great suggestion. Was that
I
Yusha?
think it was Yusha.
Cough,
I
cough.
think it was Yusha. Yeah.
Good. All right, folks, we're coming up on 7 o'clock. We opened this room up around 4. So any concluding thoughts? I thought this was a phenomenal conversation.
It was excellent. My favorite line was "Childhood grew up within me," which was like at the end. So I wonder if his struggles with identity started in childhood and that conflicted child still lives within. I think it was, even though we didn't have a lot of people from the languages, it was perfect also on the language aspect of the whole movie. So it was perfect for our collaboration, and I'm so happy I attended. So yes, I agree. It was wonderful, insightful, interesting conversation.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm definitely gonna go back and watch it again without the subtitles, because it was distracting me, to be honest, the subtitles. And yeah, I'm definitely gonna go back and watch it again and see if I can pick out something that I might have missed, because I do apologize, you guys. I was at work. I still am actually. I'm working late today, but it was really interesting to hear all of your discussions and contributions to what it could have been or what it has been.
Yeah, and my thanks to Natalia for extending the offer and continuing the collaboration. Big shout out to Fernando for doing the promoting, Instagram, emails. I really appreciate it, man. I think you yeah, thanks for stepping up like that. And
Thank you. I just wish that this could have been done like in person so we can have more people.
Yeah, me too. But I feel like because there's so few of us, we really were able to kind of dig deep into the points we were trying to make, and that's kind of fun.
Yeah, it is true. I mean, we might have to give some extra incentives out there for people to kind of like be more into the actual movie, because this is a good movie for them to see. And I do believe, and I guess this is part of my closing remarks, is like I don't think people understand that there are some actions that you can do that, even though they may seem unconsequential, they have a bigger ramification of what is going to happen later on in your life. So things like this, like movie nights, could be something that can spark some ideas in your mind that can actually take you to do something very meaningful later on. But if you don't open yourself to these new ideas, then you miss the opportunity to do something like that, and then you have to keep waiting for that right moment to do something meaningful. So I'm just glad that I'm here, and it's just another moment for us to kind of like to see how can we bring more students to be aware that they can do something more meaningful if they just do something more.
Yeah. And so I think we're going to do one more installment in the film series. I think we're going to try to shoot for the first Wednesday in December, which is the last Wednesday of the semester before finals week. I think that's December 2nd.
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah.
Try to do that. I'm not sure. We don't have anything like lined up, but yeah, try to think of another film that you might show other people.
Sure.
You know, one thing I will say, I would rather have, now that I've attended 2 of these virtual film series, I will say that it's better to have a smaller, more focused group like we had the Socratic Circle in class, because then there is more, like, I feel like more people get a chance to speak of what they're wanting to, and they're not intimidated by, oh, there are still so many people, I should make it quick. Like, it's more focused, it's more brute, it's more unforgiving in a sense.
Yeah, and that's actually even back when we had the film series in person, there would be like 20, 30 people, 40 people showing up for the movie, but then there'd probably only be about 8 or 9 people sticking around for the conversation. So that's yeah, so that's kind of been traditional in a funny way.
The conversation is the best part for me.
Me too.
Because you can take it apart, you see details that maybe you didn't see right away. You want to go back and rewatch the movie. Conversation is the best. So I want to share a word. So in South America, when the intellectuals get together as a group just to learn from each other and to talk and have some coffee, it's called a tertulia. So this felt like a true tertulia because the group was small. So tertulia itself does not have the meaning of the intellectual conversation, but it's very commonly used that way. So it was like a tertulia today.
Can you write that down in the chat?
I did.
Oh, cool. Yeah,
Yes.
I've never heard of that. Awesome.
Yeah. In my country, we also mentioned it. I mean, for example, like it is interesting because in my country, it is used in 2 ways. I mean, she's from Colombia, I'm from Venezuela, so we're really close. Tertulia is either yes, whenever you're kind of like gonna talk about something that is more like intellectual, but if you are considered non-intellectual, somebody who comes from a poor environment, they see tertulia as like these guys are talking tertulia. You know, it's kind of like it has a negative connotation because it's like something I cannot understand. It seems too long, so it's kind of like stop the tertulia. It's kind of.
I meant it in the positive way.
No, I know you mean it in a positive way, but it can be twice. It can be, I guess it's part for me to also see that it depends on the person who is translating the word. For people who are not able to do tertulia, for them it's a negative connotation, but for those who do it, it's interesting.
Very problem of poetry. I know. I always feel intimidated around because look, I'm the only person here right now, including when Orlando was here, who only knows one language. I
think Orlando speaks too. I think he speaks Spanish and English.
I'm not completely sure how proficient he is in Spanish, but he does understand it. He understands Spanish.
Okay, yeah. Hey, what's up?
He does understand Spanish.
This meeting was as beautiful as poetry.
Yeah.
Philosophy is poetry. Poetry is philosophy.
Okay.
All right, y'all. Well, I guess that'll do it. Yeah, thanks for just again a great conversation. Yeah, one of the lines in the movie, he said it was like a feast. This was a feast for the ears. Thank you. And yeah, I'll see y'all again soon.
Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
We need to work on a
Thank you
t-shirt.
guys.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
Yes, we should.
She's bragging. It's like, listen, haha. They're the one with that